There we go.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Jane.
Excellent. No problem. And a very warm welcome to everybody. I know you've probably all had very long days, so taking some time out on what is a very precious evening is very much appreciated. I've probably seen many of you before because I've done lots of presentations for your local authority, but for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jane Burchall. I am a Senior His Majesty's Inspector, and since the beginning of September, I have had the privilege of being the Assistant Regional Director for Regulation and Social Care. So if you have met me before, you've probably met me under my role as Senior HMI for early years, but I have moved from that role, and that role is now being covered by one of my ex-senior officers, Teresa Newman. So it might be Teresa that you might get to see in the future. But I'm here today to talk to you about the launch of our renewed inspection framework, so the education inspection framework, and our renewed approach to that. So over the next sort of hour or so, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our journey, about our new approach, about what the changes will look like, and then I'll give you some opportunity towards the end for some questions. We did almost run out of time this morning, so I've done a little bit of tweaking to the presentation because I want to make sure that if there are any questions that you definitely have the opportunity to ask those. Use me while I'm here to ask me any questions, either pop them in the chat. I know we will keep an eye on the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on it as well as we go through, but equally, towards the end, you'll be able to just pop your hand up or take yourself off mute and ask any questions that you have. But I think it's really important to start by saying that we as an organisation, just like all of you, are absolutely determined to raise standards and improve lives of those children that we serve, particularly those children who are most disadvantaged and who are vulnerable. They are absolutely at the heart of what we do, and I know that they're at the heart of what you do as well. In terms of the work of Ofsted, we know that our work is valued by parents, by children, by decision makers, such as your local authority. But we also know that we need to absolutely work really hard to reset our relationship with the sectors that we inspect and regulate. So last year, we undertook a very big consultation called the Big Listen, where we heard from many thousands of parents, professionals, and their feedback that we received through the Big Listen has really helped us to reflect on the way we work and to make changes to the way we work. And some of those changes have already been implemented, and now from the beginning of November, we're about to implement many more changes to the way in which we conduct inspections. And then this year, as we were developing our renewed approach to inspections, we consulted on that approach to inspecting education providers. So that's yourselves as early years providers, but also with our schools providers and our further education and skills providers. And those changes we are implementing this autumn. I'll talk a little bit in a bit more detail about those changes as I go through the presentation. So I'm going to be sharing all of the changes that we're going to be making and what they mean for your setting, whether you're a childminder, and I can see we've got lots of childminders on the call tonight, whether you're a preschool, a full daycare setting, or an out-of-school club. We'll talk a little bit about the changes that we're making and how they will relate to you. And then, as I've said, we'll have a little bit of time, hopefully, as we go towards the end to pick up any questions. But please feel free to pop them in the chat as we go along. I think it's really important that we start by thinking about our common and collective aims. Every one of us, whether it's myself and my colleagues in Ofsted as regulated inspectors, whether it's the local authority or whether it's yourselves as childcare providers, we all have a desire to work for babies and children of all ages to make sure they are all receiving a high quality of standard of care and education. And a standard of care and education that enables all of them to achieve, to belong, and to thrive. And of course, part of that is about achieving great outcomes. So the changes that we are implementing are really very much about raising standards. We all know children only get one childhood, and it's really important that they're well supported and well educated through that childhood. And it's important that we all continue, both ourselves as an inspector and regulator and yourselves as providers, we continue to put children at the heart of everything that we do, first and foremost at everything that we do, because we all want great outcomes for all of our children. But we also know if we get it right for the most vulnerable, we will get it right for all. So for the very, very first time, inclusion will be a real focus on every inspection. Through that consultation, parents told us that they want better, more detailed, more nuanced information about their child's preschool, nursery, childminder, or out of school club. Information that highlights the setting strengths, but also identifies any areas there might be that would benefit from improvement. And we also, in this process, need to be fair to settings. Important that we recognise and we point out that where settings don't meet expected standards, that we'll identify that. But we will also, it's also equally important that we celebrate success and we celebrate where provision is exceptional. So on all inspections, we're going to celebrate the strengths of that setting. We'll consider leaders' priorities and the progress they're making towards those, and we'll validate that alongside leaders. And then together with leaders, we'll highlight where improvement is still needed. And we're really committed to improving how it feels to be inspected. So what it's like to be on the receiving end of inspection, while we're continuing to encourage and support you as settings to raise standards. So I thought I'd do a little bit of background so you could understand the journey so far before I talk about what the changes are going to look like. So we think about the case for change. So what started all of this change that we're about to implement? Now, you as leaders of education and care settings and other earlier stakeholders absolutely know and understand the importance of accountability. So giving your daily responsibilities in educating and caring for our youngest children, you are all really familiar with the need for accountability. But for many years, there's been calls made to look again at the burdens created by this accountability. And Ofsted and our inspection regime is just one element in a very complex system. So it's something that we can look at and affect change in terms of reducing that burden. So last year, we held what we call the Big Listen, I've already talked about, in order to give you all that chance to help shape the future of our inspection work. So thank you to all of you that contributed and took the time to contribute and respond, because your comments, your feedback absolutely made a huge difference and really fed in to how we shaped the renewed inspection framework. Now, following that Big Listen, we set out an ambition to reset the relationships with professionals that we inspect and regulate. It was very clear through that Big Listen that that relationship had been fractured. So we knew that we had to do something to reset that relationship. But while doing so, we needed to ensure that we retained the confidence of the children and the parents and carers that we work for. Part of that commitment to reset our relationships included the commitment to renew the education inspection frameworks, and an element of that was to introduce new report cards. Earlier this year, in February, we held a 12-week consultation which set out a series of proposals for change. So based on all the feedback we had, we set out what we were proposing to do. And that covered all education providers. So that included early year settings as well. We got a really good response to that consultation. Over 6,500 people responded to that, and that was from parents as well as education professionals. We also gathered feedback through a number of other mechanisms. So we held some focus groups and round tables. We had some in-depth discussions with experts. We started in those very early days to go out and test our thinking with volunteer settings. And we also carried out some independent research, so some qualitative and quantitative research, in order to really ensure that we had a rich and varied evidence base in order to make the changes. So the changes that I'm going to set out today for you are really based on that evidence base. Now, you'll find the consultation, the response from the consultation on our gov.uk website, and alongside that, we've also published the final versions of our inspection toolkits and our new operating guides. So I would urge everybody to go onto the .gov.uk website and find the early years inspection toolkit. We're going to look at that in a bit more detail as I go through the presentation, but it's very much a document that you will absolutely need to have become familiar with to support you when we're out there on inspection with you. And then the operating guide, that describes how the revised methodology will change and how it will change both the look and, most importantly, the feel of inspection. So it's going to give you a really good overview and an indicator about what an inspector will be doing when they come out to inspect, because the operating guide is the guide for inspectors. So if you become familiar with that, you'll get a really good sense of what you can expect when we inspect. But importantly, just to reiterate, all of the changes absolutely put children first. Children were at the heart of all the decisions we made. And as I've said, particularly those who might be disadvantaged or vulnerable. But we're also focused on making these changes to be fair and empathetic for you and all professionals that we come in contact with, whilst not losing sight of our core purpose and together our collective drive to raise standards. So the reforms will come into effect on the 10th of November for early years providers, schools, and further education and skills providers. So let's dig down now into what those changes will look like. So this next slide sets out some of our proposals. It sets out the elements that we will be focusing on throughout this presentation and the elements, the summary of the changes that we will make. So when we launched all of this back in February, when we did that very big first consultation, our proposals were not set in stone at that point. We very much listened really carefully to all of the feedback from the consultation and took that on board. And then we tested and refined further our methodology. So we believe that this new approach really represents the right balance between the interests of children and parents alongside the wishes of our educational professionals. And you'll know that the core purpose and the driving mission for us as an organisation and for inspection is to keep children safe and improve their life. So what are these key changes? So you'll see on this slide, we'll be introducing a new report card. I've got an example of what it's going to look like later on in the presentation. And the report card will really help us to highlight the good practice and the excellent practice in settings, and also help to identify where there may be areas for improvement, driving those high and rising standards. But it will also provide parents and carers with that more nuanced information that they want and that you will benefit from as well, combining an at-a-glance grade with some narrative summaries. But we'll look at that as we go through. So following that feedback and the user testing, the report card has been redesigned to make it much more accessible. So we've done a lot of work thinking about, well, how will parents want to access this information? What range of devices might parents want to use to be able to access this information? So we've made sure it's accessible on a range of devices, particularly those that are mobile, so mobile phones, tablets, etc. We've made sure it's accessible. You're probably aware that we're moving to a new 5-point grading scale to set those high expectations and to encourage improvement where it's needed. And again, in response to the feedback that we received about proposed terminology, we landed on a final set of grades that are urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, and strong standard. And we'll look at those in a bit more detail later on. And to identify the very best provision in the country, we've changed the highest grade to exceptional. Okay. I've touched on the fact, and we'll talk a little bit more about our renewed focus on inclusion. The purpose of that is to help us work with you to break down barriers that some children experience to their learning and well-being. So we'll be able to evaluate whether you as providers are providing that high quality support for all children, especially those who might be from disadvantaged backgrounds, or those children with SEND, or those children who are known or have been known to children's social care. We've got a new earliest inspection toolkit for grading, and I'm going to go through that with you in a minute, but it will help you as leaders and it will help inspectors to recognise the evaluation areas that we'll be focusing on and how we'll assess and grade providers. There's a wider range of evaluation areas than in our current methodology, but following the feedback from the consultation, we actually streamlined the evaluation areas that we were originally proposing. So we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what that means to you as an early years provider. Okay, so let's now think about that strengthening about inclusion. So we will put babies and children first. We'll work with you to identify ways in which you break down those barriers to learning and barriers to well-being and progress and achievement. And together, by raising standards, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable children, we'll be having that desired impact in terms of improving lives. And that's why we are introducing that separate inclusion evaluation area. Now, inclusion will be a key theme across other evaluation areas, but we will then bring that together to make a standalone evaluation and grade for inclusion. So we will be looking as part of that evaluation area at how well you as a setting are addressing those barriers to children of all ages, and also what impact that's having. What difference is that making for those children? We will always start with the government asks, the things that the government asks you as settings to focus on, whether that's through your statutory obligations or that might be through non-statutory guidance. And that's why we are particularly emphasising those children from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, those children with SEND, and as I've said, those children known or previously known to children's social care. So we're particularly focusing on those children. But equally, we'll be talking to you about any other children that you have in your setting that you've identified where you think there might be a particular barrier to their learning. So children who may face other barriers to their learning. We'll very much be working with all of you as leaders to understand the context of your setting, and that will be informed by that professional dialogue that we have with you, as well as a small amount of data that we will look at. Okay. So this slide shows you the evaluation areas that now feature in the renewed inspection framework. They're specifically designed to align with the statutory early years foundation stage framework, the EYFS. The EYFS still absolutely underpins everything that we do. So safeguarding standards will be given a met or not met evaluation in the education remits, including early years. So we won't be grading safeguarding, we'll just be evaluating whether or not your setting meets or doesn't meet the standards for safeguarding. Now, I've touched on safeguarding, I've also touched on inclusion. So alongside those two evaluation areas, the other evaluation areas for early years are curriculum and teaching, achievement, behaviours, attitudes and establishing routines, children's welfare and well-being, and leadership and governance. And for those of you who had looked at our proposed framework through the consultation, you'll notice that actually there's been a bit of a change to our original proposals because we've merged developing teaching and curriculum to create that single curriculum and teaching evaluation area. It seemed to make perfect sense that we looked at the intent of a curriculum alongside how a setting implements that intent. Now, a couple of things for you to be familiar with. Where there are no early years children present when we inspect, or you don't have any early years children on roll at the time of your inspection, inspectors will only evaluate and grade leadership and governance. And the reason for this is because we won't have any reliable evidence on which to assess the impact on children of the other evaluation areas. So inspectors will use that particular evaluation area, the leadership and governance evaluation area, to determine the ongoing suitability of a provider to meet the requirements of the EYFS and, where applicable, the childcare register. And where that's the case, we will grade leadership and governance against the expected standard, the needs attention, or the urgent improvement grades only. Now, if you are a provider that only provides before and after school care and holiday care, the learning and development requirements don't apply to your particular setting. So in those scenarios, we will only be we won't be evaluating the curriculum and teaching evaluation area or the achievement evaluation area because they won't be applicable to those kind of providers because you don't need to meet the learning and development requirements. Again, returning to inclusion, what are we going to do? How are we going to gather our evidence that reflects the typical experiences of children? Because that's what we're going to be looking at very much in this new or renewed inspection framework. It will be, what is it typically like to be a child in a particular setting? Not just on the day of the inspection, but what is it typically like? So we'll be looking particularly around inclusion, but also around, for all children, we'll be looking at the systems and processes that you have in place for practitioners, for example, to work with parents so that they're able to meet children's differing needs. But again, we'll do that whilst thinking about the context of your particular setting. So the evidence we gather for evaluation areas such as curriculum and teaching, we will also consider how well these are designed inclusively so that you are meeting the needs of all children who face those barriers to their learning and well-being. I'll talk a little bit more about case sampling in a few minutes, but I think it's really important at this stage to just emphasise that we talk about case sampling, we're not talking about case studies. So please be assured that we're not going to be asking your staff or you as leaders to prepare anything additional for your inspection, such as a case study. We'll sample children just as we do at the moment, but we'll do that through our observations and, most importantly, through our discussions with you as leaders, discussions perhaps with the child's key person, and wherever possible, discussions with children's parents as well. So we're introducing a toolkit. Now, as I say, if you haven't yet been able to access the toolkit, strong suggestion that you do. This slide shows what the toolkit looks like, but the purpose of the toolkit really will help show you as leaders and will also show inspectors what the different evaluation areas that I've already touched on, but it will help us that you understand what those evaluation areas will focus on, and within them, the standards that we will use to evaluate and grade settings. And we're going to look at this in a bit more detail in a minute. Now, inspectors will apply the toolkit evaluation areas, the themes, and the standards, but they'll do so tailoring those evaluations to each setting's context. So again, we'll be considering what is unique about your setting, what is the context of your setting, what kind of provider are you, and we'll be tailoring our evaluations accordingly. Now, there is nothing in the standards that are set out in the toolkits that should add to your workload. They're built on the requirements of the EYFS. They're built on the standards and the expectations already placed on you as leaders, already placed on your provision. So for you, that's the EYFS and the other non-statutory guidance. So there's nothing within those standards that you shouldn't be doing already. So no need for you to do anything different. But they can help you. So and through our inspection, we aim to help you focus on delivering those requirements more efficiently and effectively. So again, a key message for you to take away: we don't expect you to be doing anything just for Ofsted or just for your inspection. There is no expectation for you to do anything different or additional for Ofsted or your inspection that isn't already part of your usual day-to-day business. We also don't expect you to have completed any kind of formal self-evaluation. But I think once you get to look at the toolkits, you'll probably see that they are quite helpful, and you may wish to use them to support your continuing improvement, because they do provide you with a clear set of standards that you'll be able to evaluate your own provision against, and then you can work with the inspector on inspection to be together and collaboratively evaluate your setting against those standards. Now, the general structure of the toolkit is the same. So the general makeup of the toolkit is the same, whatever remit that you are in. So there's evaluation area summary, there's an explanation of how this applied to different contexts, there's an explanation of the evidence that we'll consider, and then there's those grading standards. And we're going to look at each of those in turn. But although the structure is pretty much the same for all remits, the content varies because we've carefully reflected on our evaluation in our consultation and given the careful thought they can be applied to different sectors. So let's have a quick look together at what the toolkit looks like. So if you've got a toolkit in front of you, you might find it useful to turn to the relevant pages. So we're going to start by just having a very quick look at the first few pages of the evaluation area for curriculum and teaching. So if you've got the toolkit in front of you, you'll find that on page 16. Now, this is how all of the evaluation areas are structured. We're just looking at this point in time at the curriculum and teaching. So there's a covering page for each evaluation area, which includes a summative statement at the top, and that helps you to understand what the evaluation area is. So it's designed to help you and to help inspectors to see at a glance what that evaluation area is about. So you'll see it says this evaluation area considers, and then there's a number of bullet points underneath. So an at a glance view for you to understand what is it we're really looking at when we're looking at curriculum and teaching. Underneath that, you'll see there's in this blue box, there is a little paragraph there, and that's a statement that reminds us that our grading standards are absolutely based and grounded in what settings are already required to do. So as previously explained, it's based on those statutory duties, those statutory and non-statutory guidance. It's based on existing professional standards and existing expectations that you as a setting should already be meeting. And our HMCI, Sir Martin Oliver, has already stated that he feels that these toolkits will make it much clearer than we ever have, that settings shouldn't be doing anything just for the day that our inspectors come. They shouldn't be spending a single minute or penny on anything that isn't in the best interest of your children. So hopefully you'll find that very reassuring. Now, underneath that statement, there are some factors. It sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approach to the evidence gathering and grading. Again, very much based on the research that underpins the whole of our inspection framework. So you'll see that first page for every evaluation area looks very, very similar. We then go on to think about different provision types and different ages. So this particular slide shows that for the evaluation area of achievement. If you've got the toolkit in front of you, you'll find this on page 27. We've been really clear that our renewed framework will ensure consistency of inspection practice. So what we've done is we've made sure that the toolkit is reflective of each remit, but also the different provider types within that remit. So in our early years toolkit, we've included an explanation of how we will apply the toolkit and apply that evaluation area within those different provider types. So you'll see this example, achievement. Inspectors will consider what practice looks like in a childminder, or they'll consider what practice looks like for the different ages of children. So hopefully this is helping you to see that the standards are not generic statements, but they are carefully tailored to reflect those different ages of children as well as differing provision types. So where it's relevant, this section sets out areas that apply to out of school settings, as well as when we may inspect when there are no children present or no children on roll, which I've already touched on. So I suppose in short, the toolkit seeks to make it really clear how we're going to apply each evaluation area in a setting like yours, your unique setting, and what you can expect inspectors to be looking at in practice. Okay, so if we go back to the curriculum and teaching evaluation area, as we were looking at before, you'll see that once we've set out what an evaluation area covers, the toolkit then moves on into more detail about the kinds of evidence inspectors will gather. So for your if you're looking at the toolkit, this is on page 18 of the toolkit, and this is around the leadership of curriculum and teaching. So you can see in the slide that each evaluation area considers the themes, and then it gives prompts that will guide inspectors' observations and it will guide inspectors' conversations. So again, bringing much more consistency to the types of things inspectors will look at and the types of discussions inspectors will have when they're on inspection. Now, each evaluation area always starts with a theme about strategic leadership of that area, so how you are as leaders managing and promoting that area, and then they all end with a theme about inclusive practice. Really important to just remember that these prompts aren't a checklist. They're there to help inspectors think about what to explore and discuss when they're gathering their evidence in context of your setting. And make sure, as I've said, that the evaluation is consistent and fair. So an example of that, I suppose, is in curriculum and teaching. Inspectors might consider how well the curriculum is sequenced, or how practitioners adapt their approaches for children with different starting points. And in leadership, prompts might focus on how leaders support professional development, but also how they ensure the curriculum is well taught. So I suppose a key takeaway from this particular slide is that the toolkit makes inspection more transparent. You can see the themes inspectors will explore through our observations and our discussions that will help shape the evidence gathering. We then come to the next section in each evaluation area. So if you've got the toolkit in front of you, you might want to turn to just an example on page 23, which is the grading curriculum for teaching and the grading for curriculum and teaching. But all of the grading pages look very similar, okay? So each evaluation in the toolkit is graded on a 5-point scale, and that's with the exceptions I've already said with safeguarding, which is met or not met. So what you can see here on the slides are the grades we expect to see most often on inspection. So that's needs attention, expected standard, and strong standard. I think it's really important to say at this point that actually there is no read across between our existing judgments and our renewed grades in the renewed framework. We're moving from a 4-point scale to a 5-point scale, so that there is absolutely no read across. So it's really important for you to just bear that in mind. And I think it's also really important to say that that expected standard is sitting in the middle for a reason. It's the baseline for inspection. It absolutely reflects what you are required to do day in, day out in your setting. And it's absolutely the starting point for all inspections. So that's why it's there on the centre of the page, because it's the starting point. So I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the DFE set the standards through the EYFS, and that standard is a high standard to achieve. It reflects the expected standard is a high standard because it reflects the EYFS. It reflects the best start, the learnings from the best start in life curriculum review that we did and research review that we did, and it reflects other guidance. It's what every provider is expected to provide if they're providing high quality early education. Really important, one clear distinction now in the renewed framework is that we will be looking for what we call a secure fit and not a best fit. So in the existing framework, we work to a best fit. With the renewed framework, we're going to be looking for a secure fit. What does that mean? Well, it means that to meet the expected standard, or in fact the strong standard, a setting will need to meet all of the standards in that column. And when you're looking at those standards and in the expected standard column, you'll see words such as typically and generally. And that's because we recognise that the inspected standard isn't necessarily about perfection. So an example of that is that you might have an area of learning which is being developed well, but doesn't quite meet the same standards as other areas of learning consistently. So if that was the case, the early years provider may still be graded as to have a secure fit with the expected standard, even though there may not be absolute consistency with the way in which they deliver all areas of the curriculum. Now, when we look at the needs attention column, I think it's important to note that that contains indicators and not standards. So an evaluation area is likely to be graded needs attention when we don't find that there's a secure fit for the expected standard. And the indicators in this column, and you'll see on this example, which is curriculum and teaching, you'll see there are 3 bullets on the left-hand side. They're designed to exemplify why a setting might not be meeting the expected standard. Now, they're deliberately worded positively because we know that you as leaders, it's to acknowledge what you're doing, but it's also helping us to identify that something may need some attention if it's not a secure fit with the expected standard. Now, we've said all along that we expect settings to have varied grade profiles and that more settings may have areas that need attention. And I think Sir Martin's referenced the need for nuanced grading in many of his speeches, stating that grades for specific evaluation areas will allow us a much more detailed and representative assessment. Individual grading of those evaluation areas will enable parents and carers to be able to see in more detail what's special about your particular setting. So what you're doing well and what you're working on. Now, we've already looked at the grades that we expect to see most often, and this slide focuses on the 2 ends of the scales that we expect to see much less frequently, that being the urgent improvement and the exceptional. Now, urgent improvement will apply when the expected standards have clearly not been met and where there are serious concerns about the impact of the setting's work in that relevant area. So the indicators that are in the urgent improvement grading explain what that might look like in practice. And these are occasions when significant improvement is needed because breaches to the EYFS requirements are having a significant impact on children's safety, well-being, and their learning and development. And then at the other end of the scale is the exceptional grade, and that's where settings where the evidence shows that standards are not only strong but truly transformational, and that everything in the strong standard is already being met securely and consistently, and leaders are making a real sustained difference to children. So it's really important that we share this practice beyond their own setting. So let's move on and think about how inspections will look and feel, and how they're going to look different and particularly feel different. So some of the key aspects that are underpinning our new renewed framework approach is particularly that we're moving to a more supportive and empathetic approach to inspections, as I've said, which will be at which the starting point will be the expected standard. We'll absolutely take into account the context of each setting, but also we're going to be adopting a much more collaborative approach. Now, we've tested extensively this inspection methodology. We revised our approach as a result of that testing and as a result of feedback we've already received through the Big Listen, because we want to make this revised, renewed approach to inspection feel like a much more collaborative process. So we're going to be consistent in our approach to inspections, but we're going to continue to improve our processes for providers to feed back about their inspection experience. We will provide next steps for improvement where that's relevant, based on our evidence, but also based on our conversation with leaders. We'll take a real values-driven approach to inspection. We will be professional, empathetic, respectful and courteous throughout the inspection process. And I think really important for you to know is that the Ofsted Academy, who are lead on all of our training and development, are running the largest package of training to inspectors that Ofsted has ever offered prior to the framework launch, to ensure that actually our inspectors are really confident with the renewed framework and to drive consistency with which we implement the inspection framework. Alongside all of that, we've also delivered a number of webinars and events such as this for people like yourself, all the educational professionals like yourselves, to come and find out a little bit more about what the framework will look like. So let's have a little think about what that's going to be like for you in a registered early years setting. We are going to be looking at a small amount of data, published data, to help understand the context of your local community. So that will include deprivation data, it will include the take-up of EYPP, it will look at obesity levels, it will look at oral health data. Now, there's no expectation that you as providers will know all of that data. You will be able to access it if you want to. Inspectors, though, will talk to you about what that data is saying and talk to you about whether that's relevant to the particular context of your setting. We're also going to be notifying inspections in two parts. So we're going to make a notification call, probably before 10 o'clock. And as for now, so for providers of daycare, that will be before the 10 o'clock on the day before we're going to inspect. But as with now, for childminders and group settings that don't operate regularly, then we'll be calling you no more than 5 working days before the inspection. Again, we'll identify with you what days you're working, what days you're operating, what days there are children on roll, and what days children are present. And one change, particularly for childminders, is that we're going to be discussing with you and identifying the most suitable day for your inspection to take place, so you will know what day to expect your inspection. We will share information with you at that point. We're going to be sharing information by email, so that you can receive information from us before the inspection. So it will signpost you to useful information about the inspection, and it will also ask you just to prepare a small amount of data about the children and staff at your setting, ready for the planning call, which will take place later in the day. Now, if you don't have the chance to prepare that information prior to the planning call, that's absolutely fine. We can gather that information from you when we're actually on site. But we are introducing what we're calling a planning call with leaders ahead of the inspection. So we'll agree the time of that call. It'll be later in the day of the same day that we do the notification call. Now, the purpose of that call is to really help inspectors understand the unique context of your setting. So they'll be talking to you about that. They'll also talk to you about your curriculum overview and what you see as being your setting's strengths and priorities for improvement. So as I said, that'll be at a time that's agreed with you in the notification call. It won't be recorded, but you are absolutely welcome to take notes. And the aim of that planning call is to help introduce ourselves and start that professional relationship with you, to discuss the practicalities as well as I said, understanding your context and the intent of your curriculum. And it also will enable us to work together to plan a timetable for the inspection. Probably important to say at this point, we may still inspect without notice where our risk assessment deems that to be appropriate. So it's really important for you to understand that because we'll be having that planning call, we will no longer complete a learning walk when we're on site, because we'll have already discussed with you what you want all children to know and achieve at your setting when we carry out that planning call. So there is no longer a need for a learning walk, but what it does mean is that inspectors can really get into understanding and observing the curriculum in practice much earlier on in the inspection. We're going to be working really closely with leaders throughout the inspection. We're going to be making as many shared observations with you as possible. And we're going to have increased and ongoing professional dialogue with leaders throughout the inspection. Now, we know that for some that might be a little bit more challenging if you are a childminder, for example, that works on your own, or if you are already counted in ratios. But we're used to doing that, but we will still work with you to make sure that we're having as much professional dialogue and that we're giving you as many opportunities to see what we're seeing on the inspection with you and to talk to you about whether what we're seeing on the day of inspection is typical. And also, if you're an out-of-school provider, we will be, as I've already touched on, we'll be moving away from the met or not met approach to our inspection outcomes, but instead, for all evaluation areas except for safeguarding, grading will be used. So inspectors are going to be gathering the evidence for some key purposes. So firstly, they want to celebrate the strengths in pupils' achievement, in children's achievement, in children's belonging, and in children's ability to thrive. They want to validate with you your priorities and the progress you're making for on those priorities. But they also want to work with you to highlight the priorities for improvement. Your inspections will begin with a brief introduction when we're on site. So this is what we're going to be doing when we arrive on site, a brief introduction with you and with your staff where that's applicable. And as I've already said, these inspections are going to be grounded in that professional dialogue through the observation and discussion with the person who knows the setting, knows the children best. Inspectors will consider what you as leaders are aiming to achieve, how well you're doing that, and how well you know and how you know that that's actually working. As I've said, we're going to be giving that particular attention to the experiences and outcomes of all children, but particularly those who face barriers to their learning and or their well-being. And the vast majority of our evidence will continue to be gathered through first-hand means, and most of it will be gathered through those shared observation with leaders and those ongoing discussion with leaders and practitioners. And we will want to speak to some sort of key practitioners, those who are designated to take the lead responsibility for safeguarding, and we will probably want to talk to the SENCO where appropriate. We will continue to track experiences of children, so we will case sample a number of children depending on the size of your setting, so that we can really focus on the outcome and experiences of those children, especially those who are disadvantaged. So we will be case sampling children who are disadvantaged. We'll observe children as we do now in their play and in routines, and we'll observe those interactions between practitioners and children. You'll see inspectors will take time for some regular reflection, and they'll do some of that on their own before joining you as leaders for some of those collaborative and reflective discussions about what they've seen and what they've heard through those shared observations. And inspectors will agree with you who might attend those discussions. So you might want to do those discussions on your own, but if you're in a group setting, you might want to have somebody else there with you, and we can agree that with you. We'll be encouraging you as leaders to reflect yourselves on those shared observations, what you have seen, what your thoughts are about what you've seen. And as I've said, whether that's typical for your setting, so what your setting is typically like. And they will also discuss whether there's any inspection activity that needs to be adapted in light of that emerging evidence. And there are a real opportunity for us to review with you the evidence that we've gathered in relation to the toolkit evaluation areas as we progress through the inspection. This slide gives you a bit of an example of what the report card might look like. So we've listened to the preferences of parents and professionals, and you'll see that the report card that we'll be publishing will give, first of all, that at-a-glance view of a setting strengths, but also, where appropriate, any areas that may need improvement. And then there'll be some narrative against each of those evaluation areas to give that detailed picture of performance. So that 5-point scale offers the clarity and simplicity that parents asked for, and then if they want to, they can drill down further into any area that they want to understand the narrative that sits behind those grades. And then after the inspection, it feels very similar to what as it does now, in terms of you receiving a draft of that report, or that report card, you having opportunity to comment on that or submit a complaint, and then the publication timescales are pretty much as they are at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to finish there. There's a few more slides, and we will send out the slides so that you get a copy of the slides. So you will get that in a PDF. But we've only got a few minutes, but I'm going to pause there. There doesn't seem really to be any questions come up as we've gone through, but I'm just going to pause to see if there are any questions that people would like to ask now that we've come to the end of the presentation.
We've got nothing in chat, although Suzanne is typing, so we'll give Suzanne a moment. But there was a good question this morning, wasn't there, Jane, about what's happening at the moment with inspections that are happening now?
Yeah. So as I said this morning, there are very few inspections taking place at the moment, but if there is an inspection, it will be under the current framework. This new framework doesn't come into effect until the 10th of November. So if you're inspected from the 10th of November onwards, it will be under the renewed framework. But anything before then will be under the existing framework. Oh, Suzanne, this looks like it's a nice long question.
Feel free if you want to open up your microphones to ask something. There we go.
In the second call, you say for any weaknesses to be raised. Obviously, people will be worried about raising weakness and those. Okay. I understand that completely, Suzanne, but actually this is about a professional conversation about what you know about your setting, what you know to be the things that you do really, really well, but equally it's about what is it you're working on, what are the things that you are working to improve. So it's a professional discussion we'll have. And if you think I talked about we'll be celebrating success, we'll be validating your areas for improvement that you've identified and the progress that you're going to be you'll be making on those, as well as any other areas for improvement that might be beneficial to you. It's that validating bit that's really important for you to understand. So having that open and transparent conversation with the inspector that says, I know that actually perhaps we don't give our children as many opportunities, let's say, for large physical development, but this is what we're doing to work on it. Really important conversation, because the inspector will unpick that anyway through their inspection activity. It's really important for them to have that open and transparent conversation with you, because it will give them the confidence about your leadership and management skills. It will give them the confidence that you actually are all over this, you know what your areas for improvement are, and you're addressing those. So I hope that reassures you that people shouldn't feel worried about sharing the things that they feel they need to work on. It should be seen as a strength in leadership and management. Okay, I think we've got another question coming through. So, Suzanne, I hope that answers the question for you. If it's quicker for you to just come off mute and speak to me, please feel free to do that, because I can see people are typing, but it might be a little bit quicker for people to come off mute. So please feel free to do that. We all sit here in anticipation for the next question, because we can see someone's typing. Oh.
I don't know if you've decided not to ask your question, maybe because it was taking a while to type, but feel free, please do open up your microphone and ask. It could be something that everybody wants to ask but hasn't sort of perhaps thought of the right way to ask it or something. So this is your chance if you do want to know something. No?
No?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, as I said at the beginning, you can always email me any
Definitely.
questions and I will get them to Jane and get an answer back for you. So do that. When we send out all the PowerPoint, the slides and everything for you, you'll have my email address. You can come straight back to me. That'll be within the next few days before half term. So I can sort of look out for any emails back from you guys. Jane, thank you ever so
You're
much
welcome.
again. As always, very, very useful content there. I hope everyone in the room will agree, and I'm sure everyone will have taken something, if not
Good.
lots, away from this session tonight. So
Excellent.
thank you again.
You're
And
welcome.
thank
And
you, everybody.
yeah, a huge thank you to everybody. I know how busy your day's probably been, how busy your evenings have been. So I hope everybody has a relaxing and peaceful evening. And I will get the presentation over to Ree so she can issue it within the next couple of days.